Welcome back. Our next guest has represented Surf City, USA in Congress for 30 years. Now he's in the midst of what could be the most competitive re-election race of all. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, Republican from Orange County. Thank you for the issue. Welcome to The Issue Is.
All right.
So you're running for re-election. Some of your opponents say you haven't done much in that 30 years. You don't deserve to be re-elected. What's your answer to them? What's your main accomplishment?
My main accomplishment? Well, first of all, I have been a member of the Science Committee for these years, and a lot of my focus has been on building America's, and I would say the one I'm the proudest of, except for some of the war things that I've done, and that is I have laid the foundation years ago, about 15 years ago, for what we call the commercial space industry. See, before it was just all done by NASA and government employees and bureaucrats, et cetera. And I helped reshape our whole space program years ago when I became the chairman of the Space Subcommittee, and I authored what they called the Commercial Space Act of 2004. And that Commercial Space Act basically is what, without it, there wouldn't be SpaceX. There wouldn't be, we have billions of dollars now being poured in to private sector space projects that would never have happened. Tens of thousands of jobs right here in Southern California. That's the thing I'm the most proud of. But I think the second thing I'm the most proud of is that after 9/11, because I had been deeply involved with Afghanistan, was fighting with the Mujahideen against Soviet troops back in the 80s, and I was able to put together an alternative to just having 100,000 Americans march into Afghanistan, which would have been a horrible tactic, and I helped set up what they call the Northern Alliance, and it's based, if you saw the movie 12 Strong, that movie was based on General Dostum, who's the guy I introduced to the people in the White House.
So some might say that was 2001, 2004. What about the last decade?
Well, the last decade, all I can say is that first of all, my opponents have thought that the only thing you should get credit for is something like a piece of legislation with your name on it. I have been I've played a major role in shaping all kinds of legislation, but and also I've been involved with projects that I don't care if I'm the one who gets the credit for it, but I've been involved with many, many different projects. And as I say, I have been the chairman of major subcommittees in foreign affairs and in science. And I would say that my greatest achievement is to making sure that we didn't pass an amnesty bill. But people don't look at that as a major achievement. I do. Yeah. I think that an amnesty bill, which would have attracted millions of more illegals into our country, would have been very hurtful for our population. And I played a significant role in stopping an amnesty.
So let's talk about immigration, because that's such a hot topic now. There's been so much criticism of the president's policy when it comes to family separation, this zero tolerance policy at the border. Do you support the zero tolerance policy?
I support turning people away at the border immediately, and I support any effort to control the border. You're not going to control the border if you take one step over the line, you get to have all the rights of an American citizen. No. I agree with the president. People should be immediately sent back. We should have a wall to make sure that people don't just get into our country. And I oppose any amnesty that we could possibly have. Now,
what about for dreamers? A pathway to citizenship for dreamers? Do you consider that amnesty?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Why should we invite, well, we have 600,000 to 1 million young people. And by young people, we're not talking about teenagers now. We're talking about mostly people in their 20s and 30s now.
Who came here when they were young people?
Yes, correct.
Against their will?
No.
I mean, their parents brought them here.
Their parents brought them. Their parents are to blame for their situation. The last thing we want to do is tell the parents all over the world, if you can get your kid into the United States, if it's illegal or not, don't worry about it, because the United States will eventually give them an amnesty, legalize their status. We will have millions more young people. But already, for just these young people, we've charted out over a 10-year period, like you say, the DACA kids. Well, okay, you legalize their status. Then they can, if they have families overseas, they can bring them. And they can bring their, of course, brothers and sisters who also may have relatives there who they are married to now. we figured there would be about 8 million more people being brought into the United States by this DACA vote within a 10-year period.
But isn't there a time period on the DACA thing that it was you from this year to this year? I mean, it doesn't go exponentially, does it?
No. What happens is that if you have the number of people that come in and you give them legal status, they then have the legal rights to do these other things.
Got it. So let's talk about the family separation at the border. What's your take on that?
Well, that was Obama's policy for a long time. I think it is dreadfully unfair for all these people to be trying to blame Trump for something that was going on the entire. By the way, I don't remember the Democrats ever protesting the Obama policy, which is what that policy was. Trump now has decided he's going to secure the border. And I would have to say, by the way, of the, I think it's 12,000, I'm not sure the exact number of kids they have now, only 15% of them have been taken away from their parents. The parents, for all the rest of those 85%, sent their kids there alone. So I'm sorry that I do sympathize with young people and older people who want to live a better life, but we have to quit giving incentives for the millions of people around the world who are suffering to think they can just come to the United States and it costs us the money that should be spent on our kids' education. The money that should be spent on the health care. These limited dollars belong to our veterans and our own families, not to someone who's come illegally from another country.
Yeah, Democrats are targeting your district, one of them the most of all, and they're trying to make President Trump one of the key issues of this race. How do you think President Trump is doing?
Well, I think that he's doing a great job, but he has alienated a lot of people only because of his personality. Look, I worked with Ronald Reagan. He was a wonderful guy. By the way, he too was beaten up, I might add, and treated. I remember them calling him an amiable dunce. I remember them trying to undercut his efforts during the Cold War to bring an end to the Cold War. And but Reagan had a sense of propriety and a calmness about him. And this, obviously, President Trump doesn't have that same personality, and it rubs people the wrong way. But in terms of the policies, the things he set out to do, to control our borders, to make sure, and he's opened up doorways now that we thought were closed, like in Korea, but elsewhere. He's decided that he's going to watch out for Americans rather than some globalist strategy to make it a better world. And I think he's done a good job.
What about the Russia investigation? Do you think that Russia interfered in our election?
I don't think Russia had any impact on our election, but the Democrats are they were so eager.
That's a different question. Do you think that they interfered in the election?
Did they in some way try to interfere?
Yes.
And yeah, sure they did. Just every other country in the world does it. Just like we do it enormously all over. The Russians did that here as well. We've spent, by the way, we spent enormous amounts of money interfering in the way they were interfering with other people's elections. And they didn't even come close to what we're spending. And every major power tries to impact election in a right way that will be good for them. And Russia is a major power. They tried to influence it, but they did not have they had minuscule influence.
How do you know that?
How do I know which?
That they have minuscule influence.
Well, you take a look at what the intelligence communities have shown us that they have, and it's a few $1 million in a few $1 million over the internet buys and things such as that, which are, as I say, minuscule compared to our election cycles and how much money we spend.
Do you think that the U.S. policy towards Russia should change? Do you think that they should be penalized for what they did?
No, this way we shouldn't be penalized for what we do either. I mean, the bottom line is they did not intervene in our system, and that way they didn't intervene for example, we were trying to say, oh, well, they were the ones that hacked the Democratic National Committee. They didn't hack the Democratic National Committee. And the bottom line is, you've had this massive attempt to get people to say that, well, Hillary lost because Trump had colluded with the Russians. That is total baloney, and it's an excuse. She was a bad candidate. The Democrats have gone so far to the left that the public can't support them, and they blame it on the Russians.
But President Trump's very own choice to head the FBI, to head the CIA, to the Director of National Intelligence, all said that they hacked the Democratic National Committee.
No, they didn't.
What did they say?
We have the utmost confidence. All of his, and by the way, that was the old director of the CIA and NSA gave that report, which said we have the utmost confidence that the Russians had done this. Now, by the way, I went to Julian Assange, of course, talked to him personally, the guy who disclosed all of these emails, and he adamantly said the Russians weren't it. And by the way, if we could in some way guarantee that he can get out of the Ecuadorian embassy, he told me he has absolute proof, just actual, not just words, but he's got proof that the Russians did not hack.
So if the Russians didn't do it, who did it?
Well, I mean, I think that it's a disgrace that you have to ask that question. Our intelligence agencies, instead of trying to play politics and blame it on and say, this was a collusion between President Trump and then candidate Trump and the Russians, they should find out who did it. And it's very clear that it was someone on the inside. There are a large number of retired intelligence officers who have done a study on this, who have indicated that this could not have been a hack from the outside. It has to have been something from a download from the inside, because of the amount of time necessary for a hack on the inside to get all of those emails would have taken a huge amount of time. And instead it was done very quickly. So we know it was an inside job, and we know there are several people working in the DNC at that time who were disgruntled because they knew that the DNC was breaking its own rules by undermining Bernie Sanders' campaign.
I mean, that's a huge allegation you're making.
No, it's been around for a while. It's just that media doesn't pay attention to it, and I'm glad you are.
I mean, shouldn't there be criminal charges for that person?
Absolutely.
What's going to happen with that?
Well,
what can you do as a member of Congress to make that happen?
Well, the first thing we can do is insist, for example, that all of the evidence be looked at and be made available, and it hasn't been. The DNC has not made their computers available. There was a murder that happened in Washington, D.C.
Seth Rich, you're talking about.
That's exactly right. And his laptop, no one's been able to look at that and check to see if there were a bunch of emails in there. I'm not accusing that that's what it, but I'm not saying that's what it is, but I'm saying at the very least we should look at that. And the reason they haven't shows you what type of control that you've got in our society by what President Trump calls fake news.
Well, and Seth Rich's family strongly disputes that and are upset.
No, they don't. No, they don't. They haven't permitted anybody to look at the machine. Yeah. That's it. And what could possibly be wrong with discovering the truth by what was in his laptop? Something's wrong there.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other top issues. Healthcare. One of the key issues that happened in terms of where we've been in terms of the Congress in the last couple of years and going forward, the future of healthcare. Where do you see healthcare going in this country, and why should Republicans be in charge of that?
Well, I can only tell you what I believe, because I'm not a Republican leadership person. No one elected me to be speaker or assistant speaker or whatever. So I can tell you what I've been pushing for. And we have been eliminating the aspects of Obamacare that were very burdensome to our people. Obamacare basically increased the price of ordinary people's life or health insurance, and that dramatically. And when it said, and of course we know this, it was a lie all along when he said, you're going to be able to use whatever doctor you want, your doctor, you get to. No, we know that was a lie now. But so what do? We've been slowly but surely trying to dissect Obamacare. What I have been advocating in its place is that we should simply do this. We know that the reason why Obamacare passed in the first place and why there's been a problem is that people with pre-existing conditions, they have let's put it, it's almost impossible for them to buy insurance. Their rates are enormously high. So what we have to try to do, instead of what Obamacare does, is throw the people with pre-existing conditions into a big pool with everybody else, and then everybody else's prices go way up. Instead, what we should say, how do we get the most coverage, private health insurance coverage, with people who need it? And the policy that I've been recommending is that you bifurcate people with pre-existing conditions. My daughter had leukemia, for example, and she's 14 now. She had it about 6-7 years ago. She's cancer-free now, thank God.
Congratulations.
Okay,
yeah.
But her health insurance now forever will be higher because leukemia can come back.
Right.
So we just say everybody with a pre-existing condition, it's cataloged by the federal government. The federal government keep computer records of everybody with a pre-existing condition, and if it comes back, just let we can have either it can be handled by the federal government through any number of funds, but it just becomes a federal responsibility. You can have Medicare, and then Medicare would be reimbursed from the general fund. They know how to do it, or Medicaid, whichever one they want it to be. But if that handles the pre-existing conditions, that means, but it would be predicated on this. You don't get your pre-existing condition taken care of unless you have health insurance for everything else. But now everything else is cheaper.
Yeah.
Is much cheaper. So we brought down my idea has been bring down the health care costs in insurance for everybody, and those people with pre-existing
Wouldn't that be a huge bill to the federal government, though?
Yes, it would be. Sure it would.
But you think it's money well spent?
I think it's we're going to pay for it one way or the other.
Yeah.
We might as well just go right up front, say we're going to pay for it one way or the other, either through increased prices on your health insurance policy, which screws up everybody, or just say, hey, this is a general fund responsibility.
Yeah, you've been in Congress a long time. Isn't it a failure of Congress that this hasn't been taken care of?
Well, I think that you can only be accountable for what you try to do. You can't be accountable for what everybody else does.
Yeah.
And I know that there are several things that I'm very proud of. For example, you asked me one of the things I've been very active in is I have managed to help create not only an aerospace industry, a private aerospace industry, but I have been deeply, I think people give me a lot of credit for being the father of cannabis legalization in this country. We have now in our country, over half the states have legalized cannabis, but it all started over the years when I fought the law, and when about 5 years ago, when I finally got through a bill that said, well, it actually was an amendment. Again, my name's not on the bill, but there's an amendment that says the federal government cannot spend in the department, and the Justice Department cannot spend its money to supersede state law that has legalized medical marijuana. And over the last 5 years, we've seen this enormous expansion of the medical use of marijuana. And I think that's an $8 billion industry. Don't want to brag here, but I think that I could take a little credit for that.
Sure. Do you think recreational marijuana should be legalized around the country?
I think that should be left up to the states. And that's my whole proposition has always been. We should leave those things up to the states rather than have the federal government come in and dictate to us locally.
If you're reelected, what's your #1 priority for the next term of Congress?
Well, I would like to be the chairman of the Science Committee, and I have a halfway decent chance of getting there. And I would like to develop, right now I'm very deeply involved with the San Onofre issue, and you've got nuclear waste being stored down there, and you've got the reactor's not even working anymore, and we're spending $70 million a year just to watch that nuclear waste. Well, for the last 10 years, and if I get elected and become the chairman of the Science Committee, it will happen. We are going to build the first prototype of the next generation of nuclear power. The next generation of nuclear power can't melt down, has no waste because it eats the waste from the past and actually is so efficient, and they know how to do this. They've all figured it out, and you wouldn't have we'd cure the current storage problem, and we'd be able to produce cheap, clean electricity but we haven't done it. And we haven't done it, and I've been pushing, but I think that as chairman of the Science Committee, I could get that done. Clean, plentiful energy that would again permit us to live the kind of lives we need to live here in America. If you don't, you need energy and clean water.
How do you sell that? Because a lot of people are freaked out by the concept of nuclear power.
I know. Well, I wish, I hope, I wonder if they ever get in airplanes. I mean, airplanes are much more dangerous than some nuclear thing. If it's done right, and right now, we need to make sure that the nuclear waste is handled. And I've been on several pieces of legislation. In fact, we had a hearing just the other day, and I was quizzing our new Secretary of Energy, Perry from Texas, and I asked him, I said, have you been to San Onofre? Because we were talking about safety issues, and he said, well, I've driven by there. I said, wait a minute, that's not enough. Can you give me a commitment right now that you're going to go to San Onofre with me, and we're going to go through and check out how they're storing this nuclear waste to see if it's safe? And he agreed to do so.
Good. This is July 4th week. It's a celebration of America, and in that spirit, we have bipartisan group on the show tonight. We also have Congressman Ted Lieu on the show, and I was wondering if there was something nice that you could say about him.
Well, Ted Lieu's a former prosecutor, and he's always a tough guy, and I'm sure that his abilities to be really a tough guy has enabled him to be a much stronger voice than people who have, he doesn't have much seniority, but yet he's a strong voice in Congress. So I would think that that's the best thing I can say for him, that he is a strong voice for those things he believes in, and usually people aren't quite as tough as that when they first get here.
Okay. Let's also have a little bit of fun. This is called Personal Issues. This is where we get to know you a little bit and ask you some questions. We got 30 seconds on the clock, so these are quick answers, okay?
Got it.
You ready? Here we go. Favorite book?
Favorite one? Modern Times by Paul Johnson.
Favorite Star Wars character?
Not Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Han Solo.
Okay, good choice. Favorite candy?
Favorite candy? Hard caramel candy.
A good one. Favorite fictional character?
Fictional character. Favorite fictional character? I don't have one.
Okay, iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Favorite karaoke song? Do you have a go-to?
No.
Favorite meal?
Favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs.
Excellent, very nice. Well, we want to end on this, since you are from Surf City, USA, and you're a big surfer. We've got some music for you.
All right.
And we've got some images of you surfing, and I know you're going back to surfing. You had an injury. You're going back to surfing this week, right?
It wasn't an injury. My surfing wore all the cartilage away to my arms, so I had to replace my shoulders.
But what does the ocean mean to you? What does surfing mean to you?
Well, it's freedom for number one thing. But have you ever gone surfing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you catch that wave and you are going across the face of the wave, it's just, that is the moment that the whole world disappears, and you're just on that wave, and it's a religious experience.
It is. I think it's a spiritual experience, surfing. Yeah. Well, enjoy the ride. Great to see you. Thank you. You made it through the ride of this show. We appreciate it. Stay with us. The Issue Is comes right back.
We'll all be gone for the summer. We're on safari to stay. Tell the teacher we're surfing USA.